My name is Tawanda Hunter Stallworth, and I have the privilege of serving as the program manager for the Anti-Racist Development Institute here at Penn State Dickinson Law. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar entitled Relationships, Coalition, and Courage in the Second Nadir, sponsored by the Anti-Racist Development Institute at Dickinson Law with support from Risealliance at LSAC and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. Those participants who registered in advance received pre-webinar materials that will help set the stage for today's conversation. If you did not receive those items and would like to, please just send us an email at adi@psu.edu. Relationships and coalition have been fundamental to our journey of building an anti-racist law school, legal academy, and legal profession, and have informed our collective courage in the development of our ambitious 10-volume book series of the same name. In 2025, as our team ventured forth to assist institutions and organizations with implementing anti-racist principles using design thinking methodology, lexical usage of the words relationship, coalition, and courage have increased in frequency, relevance, and necessity. In 1954, historian Rayford Logan coined the phrase the nadir to refer to the lowest point of race relations in United States history. From the end of Reconstruction until well into the 20th century, scholars, sociologists, and anthropologists seem undivided on the precise years to assign to this era, but seem to agree to understanding it as a sort of rebellious response to the Reconstruction Amendments and where the Jim Crow era situates itself on our historical timeline. This was the time period when good church people would leave houses of worship and attend lynchings in their community to watch for spectacle and to collect souvenirs for generations to come. May we never forget the nadir. The words of Professor Sherilyn Ifill and the Reverend Melvin Wilson led me to wonder if, in fact, in all of the bewilderment and confusion of this present moment, we were headed to or presently experiencing a remix of an old familiar tune. I began to search the internet for others who may have suggested the same and found an article written by Professor Nathan Connolly entitled "This, Our Second Nadir." The accuracy and relevance spoke to a present collective sentiment. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that it had been written in February 2018, 7 years ago. My theological training compels me to pay close attention when Kairos timing collides with Chronos timing, as was the case when I completed Connolly's article. Surprisingly anchored, I quickly realized how aligned my present state was with the first element of the ADI's operational definition of institutional anti-racism, to acknowledge. Oxford defines acknowledge as to accept or admit the existence or of truth. As integral to our definition, we must acknowledge the reality of systemic racism, subordination, and oppression. And there's freedom in that all by itself. Knowing where you are not only gives definition to the experiences that you are having, but it also helps you to understand how you will get to where you want to go. You will never get to your destination if you are unclear about your present location. In keeping with our commitment to the iterative nature of design thinking, how can what we have learned from our original nadir of race relations inform how we move forward? How might we use the calculus, this trifecta of relationships, coalition building, and courage to not waste this nadir? As I introduce each of our speakers, please make note of their very accomplished full bios at the links provided in the chat. Our speakers include Damon Hewitt, the President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. Hewitt previously worked for more than a decade as an attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Hewitt joined the Lawyers Committee as Executive Vice President in 2019 and was named its president and executive director in 2021. Since then, he has led the organizational victories on a range of critical issues, including affirmative action, race-conscious programs, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, election protection and voter disinformation, redistricting, fair housing, algorithmic bias and artificial intelligence, and police accountability. He holds a BA in political science from Louisiana State University and a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Danielle Conway, the Dean, and Donald J. Farage Professor of Law, is the co-recipient of the inaugural Association of American Law Schools Impact Award, which honors individuals who have had a significant positive impact on legal education or the legal profession. She received this recognition for her work in establishing the Law Dean's Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project. Dean Conway earned her bachelor's degree from NYU Stern School of Business, double majoring in finance and international business. She earned her JD degree with honors from the Howard University School of Law and holds dual LLM degrees in government procurement law and environmental law from the George Washington University Law School. Dean Conway was recently named president-elect of AALS, the Association of American Law Schools, and has been a member of the American Law Institute since 2004. In 2016, Dean Conway retired from the U.S. Army in the rank of Lieutenant Colonel after 27 years of combined active, reserve, and National Guard service. Today's conversation will be moderated by none other than Jay Austin, the Executive Director of LSAC's Reaffirming Individuals Supporting Education Alliance, which provides leadership and professional development support to student-facing law school staff by focusing on how the lived narratives and layers of personal identities of law school staff can be influential in building and retaining a legal education pipeline that adds to the diversity of the legal profession. Outspoken about topics pertaining to the value of inclusivity, Austin has presented on a range of topics, including the critical need to consider the narrative of the intersectionality of lives lived in admission policies and practices, and inclusion and diversity in institutional leadership. A favorite presentation title is It's More Than Gender Neutral Restrooms, Empowering the Individual and Transforming the Institution. Austin attended Columbia University, where he studied biology, psychology, and completed a postgraduate certificate in international management at University of Liverpool. Today's conversation will be recorded, and we invite you to use the Q&A function for any questions that you may have. As I invite Jay forward to guide our conversation, I invite all of you to use the chat function and provide us with just one word that describes how you are feeling today. Jay?
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, both in the Nadir and thinking about ADI, as well as the introduction to our panelists today. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here, to be facilitating this, what's going to be really an amazing, important conversation. I think the things that's most important here are the three words that we're building this conversation around: relationship, coalition building, and courage in the Second Nadir. So what I'd like to do is start by having Dean Conway and Damon Hewitt begin by just answering a very first question. In your thoughts and brains and hearts and souls, are we in a second Nadir? Or as some have said to me, this might be the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth. But for now, are we in a second Nadir? Danielle, Damon, I'll leave it to you.
I'll be quick. I'll answer in the affirmative. Yes, we are in a Nadir, and we've seen what many would call nadirs in other disciplines, in other areas of life, in other situations. But I think what is compelling about this second nadir is all of this is crashing together. It is not just a reduction in force of federal employees. It is not just an assault on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. It's not just the visceral and now intentional and now expressive communication of anti-Blackness in society. It's not now just assaults on higher education and investment in basic research. Is all of these things cascading together, coming together, that makes this second nadir so visible, so visceral, so powerfully implicated in what we are all experiencing as a collective.
Thank you, Damon. Your
Well,
thoughts?
Thank you, Jay and Dean. That was well said and powerful. I also go to the facts on the ground, the facts of people's lived experience, the facts of what's happening in policy and what policy is doing to people. That all that we have come to, I won't even say take for granted, but appreciate in this country, whether it be social safety net, whether it be understandings about what opportunity could look like, understandings about people's place in this world. All of those things seem to be unraveling. And I'll try to stay domestic, but I have to say that there is a new talk, or recent talk rather, of a restructuring of a global world order, which I think is very worrisome to many people. But I would say the paradigmatic pieces for me about that they give evidence that we're in the second nadir already are a couple of things. One is that we are seeing the abandonment with ease of pacts, pacts of understandings, of arrangements that were designed to correct for not only the problems of the past, but also the inequity of the present. We are seeing that left and right. And I think that is clear with respect to the attacks on what we used to call affirmative action, which we haven't really known in a number of years, even before the Supreme Court decision in a classic sense. The rhetorical and legal attacks, and the unlawful attacks as well, on what we've come to know as diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I'd say is kind of a cousin of affirmative action as we used to know it. Let's say a softer, less aggressive, but still important form. But the other piece is that we're seeing this happen in a way where there seems to be this kind of amnesia about the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion plans and programs were designed to actually help institutions, colleges, law schools, workplaces, corporations to comply with existing federal civil rights laws and obligations, and also some state laws as well. So you're seeing this retreat from something that some view as a favor, but also kind of a failure to cognize the fact that there's ongoing legal obligations. The way I think about some of this is the way that my friend Professor Kimberly Crenshaw put it not too long ago, and I may not quote her accurately, so I'll call it a paraphrase. She spoke about the period of following Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction after the Civil War, and how it ended with the compromise of removing federal troops. That's what we're taught in schools. But what happened as a kind of a meta-narrative was that there were people, in that case, powerful interests that are controlled primarily by white people in this country, who preserved their own institutions, their own relationships, their own focus on their own protection at the expense of Black Americans. And I see a lot of that happening today, although it's not only at the expense of Black Americans, it's at the expense of people of color generally, at the expense of women generally, at the expense of queer community generally, at the expense of immigrants more generally. And the list grows and grows. And so there are institutions and leaders thereof who are essentially ushering in the second nadir, if we weren't already there, out of a sense of self-preservation or isolationism. And we are starting to see that play out on a global scale, but also a very localized scale within a campus, within a corporation. And there's no good, a positive into that. It just basically it accelerates the flow towards that nadir or deepens it, as it were.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you both, Danielle. So it said the affirmative action is yes, we're in it. And so using these three pillars that we've discussed and we framed for ourselves here, relationship, coalition building, and courage, let's start unpackaging some of those, and we'll start with relationships. And I'm just going to share a little bit here because I know you both know Sherilyn Ifill very well, and you've already mentioned her name. She spoke 2 weeks ago in my hometown of Newark, New Jersey, to a very small group, and I traveled up to hear her and be there. And one of the things that she spoke about that really, really resonated with me was the use of the word harvest, that we have been for a certain generation, and mine included, and those of us on this call, on this webinar too, that we have enjoyed this harvest that was planted not by our parents' generation, but by our grandparents' generation. And I thought about that because I'm only 2 generations removed from grandmothers who were domestics. And now, as Sherilyn said, it is our job to plant. So there will be a harvest in the future for others to enjoy. Because if we do not plant now, if we do not take the time to plant now, there will be no future harvests for any of us to enjoy, particularly as Black Americans. So I thought about that in terms of relationships, right? And this relationship model that we are thinking about and how that really bleeds into what it means to plant in relationships. And I know I have wonderful relationships with each of you. And just I want to start there for a minute there. Damon, we met 29 years ago, right? When you were a senior at LSU and I was the dean of admissions at Penn Law School, 29 years ago. That's a generation. And I think about the trajectory of your career and all those other careers and how that has been framed by that chance meeting that many of us have as admissions deans and professionals with a student today. So I love the fact that we are still communicating and we're here with each other in this conversation. And of course, Danielle, LSAC has been one of the founding partners with the Anti-Racist Development Institute, and I was designated as the Risealliance Executive Director to really be the partner working with ADI, aside from the personal relationship we have. So the relationships have been really important as we three and others have been really building and planting this harvest. So could you talk a little bit about your individual relationships, not only within your small community, but within your larger community and how you see those as your own way of planting seeds?
I'm so glad you started and shared that connection between the two of us. It makes me pretty emotional to think that
Me too.
The journey we've both been on and how it started. To see and appreciate human potential, as imperfect as I'm sure I was and remain, is a gift. It's a gift of sight. It's an investment in human capital, human potential, and it's a commitment to help nurture and develop. So you did your own seeding, your own planting. I have to say, Jay, almost 30 years ago. And it's been transformative in my life, I would say. So I always thank you for that. But I would say, this work is relational. The work of molding minds, whether it be on a campus, whether it be the work of trying to change the world through civil rights litigation and policy, or even philanthropy. These are inherently optimistic enterprises where we're investing in a future. At the Lawyers Committee, we talk about the concept of a future we deserve, because we actually do think we have to believe and claim that future to understand that we reframe the future and even the present. Benefits and opportunities are not handouts or hand-ups. They're what everyone deserves. The right to be safe, the right to educational opportunity, the right to fit not just housing, period, but affordable housing, the right to be safe from state violence by the police or vigilante violence by white supremacists. Like, these are things that this should be part of a future that we deserve and the present as well. And so we only get to these concepts in these places through relationships. Every step of the way in my career has been through the inspiration or from someone or perspiration by others, whether it was you, Jay, whether it was certain professors in law school, like Regina Austin, who we both know, whether it be like one of my mentors who was my supervisor when I was a summer intern at the Lawyers Committee in 1998, Robin Linhart, who's now a law professor herself, who said, you know what, you should aim high. You should seek X opportunities, not for yourself, because of the impact that you can make. And so as I think about the work that I do, I have this realization that it's never really been about me. I get to do the speeches and the talking and be out front, but it's not really about me. It's about the people we're serving. It's about the people who come behind us. It's about my children. It's about the community with whom I identify. I had this really amazing opportunity a year or so after Hurricane Katrina, which struck my hometown of New Orleans. I was accompanying a friend who was being filmed by Spike Lee for what ended up becoming his documentary When the Levees Broke. And he actually asked me, he said, "Oh, you're from New Orleans. You should speak too." And so he ended up using a number of the segments, and I know they get replayed. This year's the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And when people I knew from growing up, from high school and college, saw me, what they said was, "Oh, Damon, great job. You spoke so great," whatever. What they said was, "You were speaking for us, for all of us. You were speaking for our community. We saw ourselves reflected." That was the highest honor anyone could ever give me. Because again, it wasn't about me having a platform. It's what you do with that platform, how you reach back and lift folks up, how you reach to the side and bring folks with you, and how sometimes when people don't know the way, you help them find the way. So you did that for me, and my duty is to pay that forward and do that for many other people as well. So those relationships, where we walk in our own power, not for our own benefit, but for the greater cause, the greater good, I think have sustained me and given me purpose every day.
Beautifully said, Damon. And I'll follow with some personal reflections too that have built my understanding and my theory and practice of relationship building that eventually led to the article that you all have access to called Black Women's Suffrage. And we gave a 7-page snapshot of that article, which is about 85 pages. So, read at your peril. But the 7 pages represent, a life experience up to the time that I am today, 57 years old. And I started actually understanding relationships, not being in them, but being enveloped in books. And my most cherished activity as a young person, aged 10 to about 18, was reading. And you could ask, who was I reading? And I was reading Elie Wiesel. And why was I reading Elie Wiesel? Because I had a piano teacher who happened to be a survivor of the Holocaust. And even though he was teaching me piano, he was teaching me about life. And I spent a lot of time with him one-on-one. I was reading then Octavia Butler because I wanted to see myself in spaces. But Octavia Butler, who died in 2006, always talked about being and feeling alone, except for her writing. So those were places of refuge for me. But I was not introduced in school to the people that Damon spoke about. I was not introduced to the people who are cited in the footnotes of my article. But what I did do was, because my mother had no money, was I went into Army ROTC, and wow, that blew my mind. I had never experienced that kind of familial relationship with people who you didn't know, except you were dressed just like them on day one. And what that did for me to understand camaraderie and comradeship and going through perilous and precarious exercises with people who were feeling the very same thing, even though they didn't look like you. Most were men, but they didn't look like me. But even with those differences, we gelled, we came together, we pulled together. That was my first experience of relationship. But then most impressionable for me was being in a host culture in Hawaii and learning about and understanding about indigenous peoples. Again, they never taught me in school about Native Americans, but to be in a host culture and to live that host culture life, to learn about Kuleana and to learn a language that wasn't even mine, but to do that because the people around me surrounded me, engaged with me, and they will say, Hanaid me, brought me into their culture as kinfolk. That was the pinnacle of the education about relationship, and to see how we as a people, as Black people, were instructive to Native Hawaiians sparked my interest in myself. How scary, but how wonderful to hear my own self say that someone else had to spark my interest in myself. Native Hawaiians, Aboriginal Australians, Torres Strait Islanders, the Maori and Aotearoa taught me about being Black, which allowed me, those relationships allowed me to come back to learn about myself at the latest stages of my life. So without those relationships, I would not have the venture and the adventure of understanding how deep and precious the Black experience has been, not just for those who identify as Black, but for everyone who wants to resist oppression, everyone who wants to resist subordination, everyone who wants to resist racism.
Powerful, powerful stuff from both of you all. I want to, during our prep meeting, Danielle, I'm just going to stick with you for a second. You dropped a nugget on us that we all actually had to write it down.
Right.
I'm gonna feed that nugget back to you so you can kind of expand on it and just so the larger audience can hear this. And this nugget was, we were talking about relationships filling our cups and the coalition building that happens around, particularly around Black women and kind of pre-civil rights, Jim Crow civil rights. And Danielle dropped this nugget of genealogy of emancipatory actions in this nadir.
Mhm.
Genealogy of emancipatory actions. So Danielle, can I ask you to just shed some light on that for us?
Absolutely. So again, that reaches back to my experiences in host cultures with indigenous peoples. And that's the reference to genealogy, how we see ourselves in relation to others, how we gain awareness of ourselves because of others. And so what this genealogical experience has set the course for is looking at the challenges and the obstacles and the hurdles and the oppression that others have experienced, and then training oneself on their modes and methods of emancipation to break the yokes of settler colonization, of colonialism, of the hypocrisy of stereotype mythology and the idea of the savage, and how those yokes were broken because of the belief in the connection of one person to another. which was so strong and was so unbroken, that the genealogy is what protected the collective. And then watching how that genealogy freed entire societies from these yokes, created collective resistances, and then helped to recruit people into the coalition. Those were those indigenous experiences. And so, yes, I have a couple of themes that animate what I've learned in these host cultures. And one of them is the genealogy of emancipatory action, with stolen generations from various indigenous groups, and the finding of their peoples, even amidst this stolenness, and our ability as Black people in America to, even though we've been teachers in this, can also be learners in how to reconnect with our own genealogy.
You know, this is a great way to kind of segue into the concept of coalition building. And Damon, I'm thinking about you in terms of genealogy of emancipatory participation, because the origin story of LCCR is in some ways about genealogy. When I think about how it began and how it started and where you are today with the organization, can you give us a quick overview of just the work, the origin story of LCCR, and what today's intentional work is?
Sure. You know, it is a classic story of the power of relation and collective and coalition. You know, at what some would say was the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, post Brown v. Board, but before we had all of the landmark legislation and other victories, we had a time of great horror. It's what some people may refer to as another Nadir, quite honestly. But a time when we had elected officials obstructing justice, when we had masses of people who were preparing to protest in the streets peacefully, at a time where people who were fighting for liberation and freedom had to also fear for their own safety. And so it was just about 9 days after George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door to block integration at the University of Alabama so that Vivian Malone and James Hood could not integrate that school and earn opportunity and appreciate opportunity that they'd already earned, frankly. And it was but just a few days after Medgar Evers in Mississippi was assassinated in the driveway of his own home. Just days after that, President John F. Kennedy convened a landmark meeting at the White House. He was worried about what would happen in the streets, no doubt. But the people he convened were not the people from ministry and the people from community. He actually convened lawyers to say, hey, where are the lawyers? What are we going to do about this? Now, his own brother, Robert F. Kennedy, RFK, was the attorney general at the time. But he wanted to convene these lawyers because he knew that what the nation needed was a peaceful army of private attorneys general who would take to the courts to vindicate civil rights, because a government must be a good partner. We need that as much as we can get it, but government won't do everything alone. Sometimes we have to push the government as well, and we certainly do that. And so he convened this meeting of nearly 250 lawyers from the private bar, from leading law firms and other people who were going to be judges and members of Congress. In that room were some notable people. I won't name all of them, just a couple. One was the late John Conyers, who went on to become a congressman out of the Detroit area. But another was Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander, a name that Jay and I know because Sadie was the first Black woman who graduated from Penn Law School. And so there's actually a famous picture that is a view over over President Kennedy's shoulder into the room, and sitting right in the middle of that room is the unmistakable visage of Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander, who might have been the only Black woman in the room at the time. And so it was quite a notion to bring together this peaceful army of private attorneys general when it was a mix of Black lawyers and white lawyers. Like it was Washington, D.C., but it was still essentially the South, and it was 1963. And so it may not have been illegal to gather on those premises, but it certainly was not common. It was not novel. But you also had people like Ernest Dutch Morial, Mark Morial's father, who now runs the Urban League, who he was the head of the NAACP in New Orleans at the time, and he had to be worried and fearful because Medgar Evers had just been assassinated. And so to have the gumption to leave your family and travel for this meeting and then have it be blasted all through the press, and then they have to go back home and be concerned about your own safety and your family's safety was quite a notion. But knowing that this had to be done in coalition with Black lawyers and white lawyers was really part of the key. It was not always an easy relationship or an easy alliance. You had Southerners, you had Northerners, you had people from the West, you had heavy East Coast. And so for them to all come together and have a united front is the kind of thing, frankly, that we need a lot more of today. Fast forward 62 years later, the Lawyers Committee, our modern mission is to ensure that Black people primarily and other communities of color have the voice, the opportunity, and the power to make the promise of democracy real. For us, democracy is not just election day or voting season or campaigns about candidates. It's about the lived experience, the living and breathing of democracy. If you have no voice and no say and no agency, that's not democracy. If you have no real opportunity that is tangible and not just a mythical ladder of upward mobility that ends up being more of a slippery slope, that's not democracy. And if frankly, if you have no power, that's not democracy. And for us, it doesn't mean power over anyone, but it does mean power within, power to articulate and have self-determination about who we are, to say on our job application or our employment application, on our law school application, exactly who we are. Power of bodily autonomy, power, as I mentioned earlier, to be free from violence, right? And so that voiced opportunity, that power is what we certainly fight for and push for today. And we know that one organization and one group can't do that alone. And so everything we do is in coalition. If I could just share one quick example that I know we discussed recently. I mentioned Mark Morial earlier, who runs the National Urban League. He brought together a group of leaders of various civil rights organizations, representing Black communities, Latino communities, representing queer communities, representing Jewish communities as well, Asian communities as well, across the spectrum, as inclusive as it could possibly be, to join forces in the first days of this presidential administration for what we call a demand diversity coalition. It's not a request, it's not a suggestion, it's not a policy idea, it is a demand that we demand a seat at the table, we demand full inclusion, we demand these things. And so Mark has also written a book called The Gumbo Coalition, which I commend everyone to read, where he talks about really lessons on leadership, but really the thing is no one can do it alone. It has to be together. That's not just one individual or one organization, but one community. So we focus on Black communities at the Lawyers Committee, but we do so in allegiance and alliance with others. We do believe there can be a collective lift, as long as there is an intentional complementarity, as long as there is great understanding and authentic allyship, not just being together for show. A lot of great things are possible. In fact, that's how we've achieved some of the greatest gains in civil rights, in racial justice, and rights in general in this country. So that really connects the origins of the Lawyers Committee and what we do today. That's how the great things get done, through these relationships, through these coalitions.
Awesome, thank you. So there's a question in the chat, and I think I can weave it into one of my next comments. So before I go there, Danielle, would you like to just quickly talk a little bit about the coalition you built with the AALS Law Deans Anti-Racist Clearinghouse? You're on mute.
Thank you, certainly. And that coalition of 5 Black women that brought forward the ALS Law Deans Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project also fronted the ability to bring forth coalitions of various deans from the 200+ law schools to do several initiatives. So the ALS Law Deans Clearinghouse Project, while born out of the murder of George Floyd and what we saw in the murder of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, what we see visually as the tip of the spear of anti-Blackness are these murders of Black and brown bodies. That is what initiated the Law Dean's Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project. But I'd love to talk about the coalitions that grew out of the work of those 5 Black women to inspire the over 200 plus law deans to identify the projects that they wanted to do to support anti-racism, or to support diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or to support freedom of expression and academic freedom, and how these relationships went beyond just the transactional, let's just get something done in the self-interest of our individual law schools. Rather, those blossomed into, where are we aligned as law deans, as leaders of this very important discipline that Damon talked about, a discipline that helps to meter this peaceful protest, that helps to meter a strong rule of law. And so what you see now is this flourishing of deans in areas where they feel like they can have impact, but together. And so the coalitions that are springing up are intersecting and interrelated, where the issues are aligned. But what it has done is created an opportunity for these leaders to have a voice. I'll give you one last example of the way in which this coalition produced a publication after the January 6th insurrection. So led by Dean Mark Alexander from Villanova, he had over 10 or 12 law deans write from different perspectives about the January 6th insurrection. And so I'll ask Serena and Tawanda to put that title in the chat. And we had weekly meetings of law deans from every different kind of law school, independent law schools, religiously affiliated law schools, public law schools, Big Ten law school. We had everybody there writing about this in support and in courageous recognition of the importance to the rule of law to our society.
I have a copy of that on my nightstand. It's part of my reading list when I can get to it. But yes, it's there to read that exactly a wonderful coalition that came out of that. So I'm going to try to incorporate the question that was in the chat about geographies into this next, because I think it really fits with it. And here it is. So Delaware Congresswoman Sarah McBride, who is the first trans person to be elected to national office, in an interview with Atlantic Magazine, noted, "Democracy and coalition building requires imperfect allies." And I interpret that too, geographies, right? Imperfect allies, different geographies here. So is that a sufficiently radical approach in this second nadir? What are your thoughts about that?
I'll take it first, and then Damon, you go
Sure.
and run with it. So part of the reason why I provided the 7 pages of this article was because I did a lot of research on coalition building. And I did it through the lens of Black women's suffrage. And from all of the research, which was not just from authors who identify as Black or women, but from myriad authors on this topic, I came out with an actual definition to help that definition, the imperfect nature of the coalition. And so the definition that I've landed on after significant research, 348 footnotes research, is that the first element is a clear articulation of a collective future for all coalition partners. So again, landing on this idea of seeing the other, where does the other want to be as a result of this coalition? And you have to have that in your frame, not just where you want to be. The second element, an investment in an iterative learning process within the collective to understand and then situate the diverse origin stories of coalition partners. So there's teaching and learning that has to go on within the collective. It cannot just be, here's our mission, here's our issue, let's attack it, and then break. There has to be teaching and learning of an iterative nature within those coalition partnerships. And then the third element, before I turn it over to Damon, is an acknowledgement. We heard Tawanda Hunter-Stallworth tell us what acknowledgement meant. An acknowledgement that the life of the coalition, right? Not the life of the partners, but the life of the coalition is paramount. Eschewing what Derek Bell taught us, eschewing interest convergence.
Damon, your thoughts about imperfect allies and coalition building?
If you didn't know Dean Conway was a scholar, you know now. Footnotes or not. It's sausage making a bit. It's a messy business, but it's also, we have in coalitions the beauty and dysfunction of family, right? To the extent you can label it as such. We have all of those things. If I had a professor in college who talked about international systems, and he said you need two things. You need cooperation, but you also need a bit of healthy conflict. If you have no friction, your tire will not stay on the road. It'll just skid right off the road. So you need some of that as a balancing force to keep us honest. And I think that I think about the movement for Black Lives, which some people label as Black Lives Matter, which is different essentially, but the broader movement has gone through quick evolution, like in the last decade, maybe 15 years, maybe. It's been just almost 11 years since Michael Brown was murdered, and some people, in Ferguson, some people mark that as a beginning. Some people say that was just an inflection point for the movement. But the movement has quickly evolved and learned from a period, for those who have been in it and know it, or have been connected to it or adjacent, understand that there was, a thing where cancel culture kind of took over a little bit. And there was this sense of like, some people were kind of approached to things as purists. Everything is, black and white, bright lines, when in fact, there's a whole lot of nuance, right? And so I do think that it's important for us to give each other grace in coalition, to remember that the work is relational, right? To get back to stay on one of your things, relationships. Also, just found a quote I'm going to put here in the chat about one of the reasons things get complicated is because it's not just that two people who have the same phenotype and look the same or come from the same community may disagree, is that we come from different perspectives and places and different struggles. And this is a quote from Audre Lorde about how there is no single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. Bring Kimberly Crenshaw back into this, who coined the phrase that certainly popularized intersectionality. The kind of concept that the law struggles to cognize. Because if you're a Black woman and you face discrimination on a job, you have to have your race discrimination claim and your gender discrimination claim. And it's not one claim, because they did this to me because I'm a Black woman, right? Or a Black man for that matter. So, I think that understanding and putting in that sweat equity to be, as I mentioned earlier, authentic allies is really important. And to kind of struggle over, what does it mean? How closely can we draw a Venn diagram of overlap where we can actually build power together, where we can make impact together? Not everything is going to be full overlap, but there certainly is enough overlap to the extent folks are open to it, but it takes a lot of work. And I think I love what you said, Dean Conway, about iterative, because if we approach things in a sense of like, as purists, like, well, there's true and there's false, and there's nothing in between, it doesn't leave us room to grow, to evolve. I think about my fraternity brothers in college. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, very proud, and how there was this thing on campus for all the fraternities about, well, you're going to have gay members in your chapter and what have you. And, we look back years later as men at how we've all evolved, and to evolved from tolerance to acceptance to embrace as people, as humans, and as a group of people. And so if we hadn't evolved in that way, if our minds don't evolve from granted very primitive, so to speak, kind of mentality as kids, you can't fully appreciate our own leadership. You can't really appreciate Bayard Rustin as the brother outsider that he is, or the sister outsiders as well. Like you can't fully appreciate and embrace. And so it enriches us all to be iterative in that way, to continue to grow, continue to learn. That is, again, Dean Conway brought the kind of the essence of scholarship to us in a way that we can all understand. And I want to marry that with just human interaction in a way that we can all understand. We should all be such scholars in our lived experience in our daily lives.
You know, Damon, we're still vibing each other 30 years later, because you just dropped in there a quote from Audre Lorde. And part of my script here today is a quote from Audre Lorde. So let me tee that up for you both. In a talk delivered in 1977 to the Modern Language Association, Audre Lorde said this: "I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it be bruised or misunderstood." 1977, she said that. So no doubt in those almost 50 years, each of you have been bruised or misunderstood, and then you've gotten back up, you've dusted yourself off, and you stand in your courage again. What types of courage do you have? And what is your source of courage? And more importantly, in this nadir, what matters, a sustainable courage or one that ebbs and flows? So courage, what's your courage?
I think my courage, quite simply, is being liberated from the fears that animated my mind, my body, my heart, my soul when I watched George Floyd being murdered. And that liberation actually came from the joy of watching my Black son, who I was scared to death, and still could experience this from being taken from me in such a brutal and inhumane way. But the liberation came, and many of you will appreciate this who know me, when my son at 13, well, then 11, decided he wanted to be a commercial airline pilot and that he was going to fly planes. And at 11 years old, thinking I was doing the right thing, taking him to a flight camp, at which I did not realize they actually took your baby from you and then put your baby in a plane. And then you were separated by physics from your baby. And once that happened, and I said, oh my goodness, he's gone and there's no way I can catch him. And realized he came back, and that over these 2 years, we go and go to flight lessons every other weekend, and he gets in a plane now and he flies with his instructor and he flies himself and he comes back. And I have to say, it was that joy in seeing this baby do the thing that I said I was supposed to do for him to protect him, but to see him learning and striving and independently flying his instructor, who is crazy as all get out, because I wouldn't do it. I would let a 13-year-old fly me around, but the instructor is. And in a way that has fueled my courage to be like my son, to get out there and to lean into what I know and keep pressing forward, keep pressing the pedal to the metal, keep my hand like on that yoke and keep doing the G-force pulls to bring anti-racism to the fore so that we can realize the promise of the 14th Amendment.
And keep
Equal
your hands on the
justice.
plow. Yeah, keep your hands
Yeah.
on the plow. Damon, where's your
Wow.
courage? Talk about courage.
Whew. I think about a couple of things. One is we go to Selma pretty much every year for what we call the Jubilee, the crossing of the bridge, really remembering the foot soldiers for justice who marched on Bloody Sunday and turned around Tuesday, and then the eventual actual march across the bridge without violence or quite as much fear. And we were marching across the bridge a few years ago, and I just remarked to myself how steep the bridge is, how you literally cannot see what's on the other side of the bridge until you get to the apex. And I thought about that as a metaphor in a couple ways. One is that we don't know where the struggle is going to take us. And those foot soldiers didn't know, but they marched anyway. I also think about how they had every reason to think that they would be injured, killed. They also had every reason to think they would lose. This is before the Voting Rights Act of 65, which was, kind of the, if not seminal, certainly one of the most fundamentally important shifts in the legal, political, social relationship between Americans and the state and between and among Americans ourselves. And they had no reason to think that they were going to win. And so I think to myself, if those foot soldiers could march with so much at stake, if they could do it, then who are we not to? Right? And so it's not a courage based upon just the past. It's the courage knowing that, as the article, the Second Nadir starts, remember, it's been worse, right? And so that's not to have nostalgia for those difficult times. That's nor to say that we have it easy now, but it just puts things in a perspective, right? I think the other source is about the future we deserve. I don't want to be made out to be a liar. If I do believe we deserve this future, this healthy, thriving, multiracial democracy, then the least I can do is fight for it. The least I can do is leave everything on the field in a responsible way, while still, being with my own family, to make that future a reality. Otherwise, I'm just yapping at the mouth and not putting anything on the line. So it's really about a balance of putting something on the line, but doing it in a responsible and sustainable way so that we can stay here, stay together, stay alive, keep on fighting.
I'm going to continue with this this notion of courage in a second, but I want to address a question that was in the Q&A. It's about coalitions still. And, again, I mean, I think about coalitions, I think, are they, sustainable? Are they fragmented? Are they episodic? And the question is, what does it take for coalitions to remain viable? Is it just time or money? Is it the emotional labor that people pour into it? Is it just being in the streets? I mean, what helps from your perspectives and what the work that you've been doing and both building into coalitions, what helps sustains coalitions?
I think honesty, integrity, candidness. You got to let people know when they have pissed you off. You have to give voice to it. One thing that I do, and I ask everyone around me to do, and I believe I am in a coalition at work. I am amongst active allies at work. But I love my community. And if I'm engaging in coalition with my community under the auspices of that authentic love, then I would be doing every individual in that community a disservice if I didn't tell them my truth and did not expect them to tell me their truth. I make it a point as a feature of effective coalition building, not to lie to people and not to go behind people's backs. As hard as it is, as hard as it may seem, I say I have to speak with you because I have something to say to you. And then I welcome you to say something back to me. But I tell people the truth. You have pissed me off today. Right? And usually, you know what I get back? I get back, okay, Danielle, go take a moment. Right? And then we come back to this. Right? And that's what we do. But never hide when Damon talked about the conflict, never hide the conflict. If you love your partners, you will hurdle that immediate disappointment, feeling of being harmed, but you got to channel that love.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I love that. I do think connecting just a bit again to the courage piece, coalitions need courage from various quarters, not just the designated leaders, but all kinds of folks. And I wanted to mention her earlier, so I just put in the chat someone whom I consider a profile in courage, Gloria Richardson. We did our staff advance. This is another name for retreat, but it's an advance because we're moving forward, not retreating. We did it in Cambridge, Maryland, Eastern Shore, where Gloria grew up, lived, Miss Richardson, and the photo at that link that you'll see shows her basically pushing away a bayonet, and she wasn't there to fight soldiers. She was just saying, "Get that out of my face, please. Get that out of my face." Right? It was a simple act of courage, but of a simple act of just common sense in a way, a common sense plea, but the connotation of courage is there, and we need that across the board. I think also I think about coalition. Coalition has to have a sense of purpose. When you mix coalition with purpose with intentional action, that's movement, right? And I think when I think about what coalition needs, I think coalition needs purpose, but movement / coalition also needs winds for fuel. You need fuel to gas that engine, that car, so to speak. And so the more intentional action is, the more we're iterative and learn not just about ourselves and strategy, but learn from trial and error. Because again, the story of the Selma Montgomery March, people think is one courageous day, or Rosa Parks just decided to sit down because she was tired. This stuff was planned. This was methodical, intentional. And I use the word even orchestrated, but not in a pejorative sense, in a positive, with a positive connotation. I do think we learn even when things don't go very well, as long as we're learning and moving forward. I think that's important for coalition. Coalition has to see itself in action. I love a thinking person's coalition, but it can't just be thoughts for the sake of thought. There has to be a praxis to it. So there has to be some action, something put in application. That's how you actually learn. It's like, lifting a weight. You get a muscle memory or a certain movement, whether it be yoga or gymnastics or basketball or tennis or softball. You build a muscle memory and common sense of movement. And all of a sudden you have 5 people on the court, or however many you have on the soccer pitch, or 9 on the baseball field, moving in unison, where you have shared instincts and understandings about the roles each person's playing, and a confidence and a faith that the next person is going to do their job or play that role. And depending on the nature of the sport, if you can't quite make it to where you're supposed to be, that there's someone there to back you up. You slide on defense in basketball or in soccer, or you back up in baseball and softball, for those who love the sports analogies, right? So there's a commonness of intentionality, a commonness of purpose, but also a trust and a faith that gets built. So that's another form of coalition.
Yeah. All that you described as fuel, right? The fuel for coalition, or the fuel for a movement, which includes coalition building.
Mhm.
It includes speaking the truth to power, speaking the truth when someone pisses you off, transparency, honesty, sense of purpose. For me, one of the things that I have been embracing as we stand in this space right now is having the audacity of courage, right? Because we know what audacity is, and we know the audacity is of horror, and we've seen so many of those images, but this audacity of courage. And so when both of you sit still, whenever you do, whenever that happens, when you sit still for a moment, what are the images of audacity of courage that you see for generational change in this Nadir? I mean, Damon, you mentioned Gloria Richardson as an image for you,
Right.
right? Pushing that bayonet away. That's an audacity of courage. What are some of the other images that you have seen or you hope to see?
I think Gloria Richardson, I think Emmett Till's mother, Mamie Till Mosley, for having the open casket, her intentional decision, and the image of her standing there in that casket. I think about the lionized notion of Ruby Bridges in the famous Norman Rockwell portrait, just walking to school what she's told and supposed to do, but it was courageous. And I think about the images that we've never seen of the other three Black girls who integrated New Orleans schools the same day, who were not lionized in the photo. To me, those are lasting images of courage. I think about Arthurine Lucy, who didn't get the memo in Little Rock about when to be at the high school and was left there by herself, scared out of her mind, had to be, but also courageous for stepping up in the first place. Yeah, those are my images that there are many more, I'm sure, but that stick with me. And I wish that we could all envision them not in the black and white, which was the modality of medium of the day, but in living color, as if they're right here next to us right now. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I have to say, because I spent so much time in a host culture, I'll do it from that temporality back. So a person who is my vision, my modern day vision of courage, was a Native Hawaiian woman named Haunani K. Trask and her sister, Millie Lonnie Trask. And these women were scholar activists, and they proclaimed the beauty and the intentionality of the Native Hawaiian spirit. They fought against colonization. They spoke up all the time. They taught people in universities all kinds of important lessons. Haunani K. Trask, through one of her students, led me to the reading of The Wretched of the Earth. She was absolutely everything. And if you Google her, you will see why I say that. And she fought. She fought, and she's still fighting in the sense of the genealogy that is her existence, whether here or in spirit. And that brought me back a long way back in this article that I wrote to all of those Black women I cited in that article, because I would not have been able to see and appreciate the Sojourner Truths, the Harriet Tubmans, the Terrells, right? To have someone from another place and space teach you that about yourself is exactly what the power of this coalition is. So I thank Haunani K. Trask. her mana continues to live.
Okay, all right. One of the images I have of Audacity of Courage is Angela Davis. And I think about her often. I had a chance to meet her many years ago too. So on January 20th, I started a project for myself. And my project was in the first 100 days to send 100 people 100 messages that included a quote from Angela Davis. I have now reached over 200 people in sending out my message, but here's the quote from Angela Davis. Remember, this is January 20th, right? Sometimes January 20th that I was beginning my project, but Angela's quote is, "Sometimes we have to do the work, even though we don't yet see a glimmer on the horizon that is actually going to be possible." Because I know and I sensed amongst my community, there was this sense of that, where was our hope? And I thought, what better quote to kind of send to people that we do look on the horizon and there is a glimmer. We may not see it yet, but we know it's out there. So what I ask, when you think about that image and that the horizon, what's your hope in the glimmer for the horizon in this nadir?
Part of my hope is that there'll continue to be horizon that we can see it, that we can see not just the sunset but a sunrise, that we can appreciate its beauty, and that it will have metaphorical significance for us in terms of renewal. The hope is that I am I guess a young person in a way, but will be 50 in a couple of months, 3 months. And I already realized, just as we started off talking about Sherlyn Eifel's talk about the future, and she had a Substack about planting season a few months ago, which I think started her on this line of thinking. And I know you had her, Dean, at the law school. I think about what I'm planting now. I'm planting hope, faith in the future, even as we're harvesting. So the simultaneous action, is what I'm holding. That we are taking and replenishing at the same time, and that will provide a continuity so that there will be those sunrises, sunsets, horizons to be seen, enjoyed, reflected upon.
And my hope never diminishes. I'm not going to say I don't get frustrated, but my hope never diminishes, frankly, because of this word genealogy. I know that I am doing the work that connects me to others, that improves the situation for others, that sheds the teaching and learning experience for others. And the more that happens, the more fuel I have, the more capacity I have, the more investment that I have. It is about sharing the mana, the kuleana, the responsibility to do pono. And the pono is to do justice.
Yes, thank you both. Yeah, before I kind of begin to close this out with a final question and conversation I want to have with you both, but there's a question that's been in the Q&A, and I want to bring it to our attention because it's been, someone has posted quite, and I thank the person who posted it. So the question is about the bus boycott, particularly the Montgomery bus boycott, and she's questioning whether or not it's been interpreted as being effective, because if the goal was integration, and perhaps the goal should have been just the development of a Black busing company for the community. Damon, I know you've taken up a lot of that work in terms of the litigation that you all have brought forth. What's your thoughts about that?
More time we probably have, but let me try to encapsulate it quickly. So I worked school desegregation cases when I was at NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Only legal defense fund and DOJ primarily have these cases for the most part, the bulk of them at least. And what I felt like we were kind of relegated to once again enforcing Plessy, making separate equal, because the laws put us in such a box for meaningful integration or desegregation in terms of what's possible. But I remember the voices of Black parents who would say, Attorney Hewitt, we just want what the white kids have, what the white families have. Why can't we get that? Why is that relevant? The NAACP had a legal strategy for decades before Brown v. Board of equalization, because before you had Brown, all you had was Plessy. And they will bring equalization lawsuits to try to get the same resources and accoutrements for Black schools as you have for white schools. At some point, the NAACP decided to abandon that strategy and wage a head-on attack on America's racial caste system. And it was not popular with a lot of Black folks, because people said, why don't you just focus on getting us what we need? Why are you focused on the integration? Yet we look back upon Brown as a catalyst, legal, societal, political, for so much of what we actually enjoy today. Was Thurgood Marshall wrong? I don't think he was wrong. But there's a whole lot of nuance in how those decisions were made. So when I think about the bus boycott, I think, the question is not whether a strategy is right or wrong, it's what does winning look like? What feels possible? That was a flex for its time. And it was a painful flex for the people who participated and who walked to work or who gave each other rides. And it was a scary flex for fear of retribution. I'm blanking on the gentleman's name, and I'm so sorry I am, who helped a black entrepreneur who helped finance a lot of that bus boycott. He, in theory, I guess, could have started his own company. Would have been economically viable. I don't know, but that was a flex. So I've never asked myself that question: was the boycott an ineffective approach? I think it was historically profound and effective, but also a building block. It wasn't the end unto itself. It was the means to an end, and that iterative process of what does liberation look like. If you are stuck behind a barrier, you're not going to knock the whole barrier over one day. You're going to pick at this brick. You're going to pick at the next. You're going to figure out how to climb. You're going to try different things. So I look back with incredible grace and gratitude on our forebears who led and engaged in that boycott.
Yeah, the questioner also just asked that he thought it was a silly question and not that, but he wanted to have more context in terms of being able to answer that question, going forward. Sure. So
it's a Derek Bell question.
Yeah,
It's
right.
an important question. Yeah.
Right. Where's Derek? Right. Where's Derek when we need him most? So we're all here today, and we have others we're all standing on Derek's shoulders for sure, right? I mean, I think about that, and Lonnie Guinier and others there that were so powerful from figures in my life at Penn, right? Exactly. So let's begin to close out here, and I have a final question. And we've talked a lot about, I would say, the 35,000-foot level about a lot of the work and a lot of the things and theories and practices and things. I want to bring it down a little bit more figuratively. So in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 4, verses 17 and 18, it is mentioned that the laborers who worked on the wall carried a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. And the trumpet was used to signal the alarm and rally the workers. Well, we know the trumpet has been sounded in this nadir for sure. So as you both labor, and you both are laborers, and bringing a lot of us along with you, what are you holding in your hands? What's in your left hand? What's in your right hand? Describe those for us.
Sure. So first and foremost, the ability to love through teaching and learning, and taking everyone in that space and going through that iterative process. I was just in front of Representative Issa today, and so I could have kept quiet. I could have not met my responsibility, my kuleana, to teach and learn, but I put the knowledge on the table and I pressed him 3 times. And then I finally got the response that I expected from him. But that's the record. And so I built the record because he said the thing. He said the thing. And I was like, okay, right? Now I know where to take the fight. So the knowledge, getting the knowledge, and then not being afraid to use it. Even if you falter. I love what Damon was saying. I call it negative know-how. You know, the bus boycott, hey, it had a purpose then, but it also gave you the additional negative know-how because we now know the if then else statement. And then to use strategy when it is exactly the right time. And I say strategy is important, especially when we're talking circles around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you, Damon, for what you said. This was a tool to be responsive, to help companies, to help educational institutions meet their responsibility. Again, Kuleana, their responsibility to deliver education according to the laws of anti-discrimination. That was it. So speak it and say it, and don't be ashamed about it, and be absolutely intentional about it.
Damien, what's in your hands?
One hand, I have what you could say is the law and the perennial project to figure out, can we use the master's tool to dismantle his own house? But also the law almost as it can be constructed to a future where we have a set of positive rights, not just the law of anti-discrimination, which has served us well, but may not serve us for the next 50, 60 years the way it did, the way it certainly is being twisted right now. On the other hand, it's just a whole lot of heart, a whole lot of love, a whole lot of passion. And, you know, together those two fuel me in many ways every day.
Well, this has been an amazing, amazing conversation with both of you. I said I hope it has filled your hearts and your spirits as much as it's filled mine, and I think the audience as well. And it's just, you know, I often say now, you know, I may not see this swing back, but I am so hopeful because of the folks who are here, and you are among those folks who are here doing the work. So I thank you both. So the I'm going to turn it back to Serena now for a beginning of our closeout. So thank you again, Danielle and Damon, for this timely and really thoughtful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, Jay. So we began asking you all what you're feeling in this moment, and we want to close out in that way too. So we hope that you can leave in the chat just one word about how you're feeling right now after this conversation and moving forward. I'll toss it back to Tawanda to close us out.
Thanks, Serena. I was busy looking at the chat and looking at all the words that were coming in. And these are different words than we had 90 minutes ago. And that's something. That's really something. So certainly appreciate everybody spending some time with us this afternoon. In closing, I'll have one slide to share. With just some information that can help us moving forward. We do appreciate the support and participation from everyone today. And want to encourage folks that if you're looking for, can you all see that, the QR codes? Great. So want to encourage folks to certainly get involved. So on the screen, there are 2 QR codes. One will lead you to a place where you can join the coalition here at the Anti-Racist Development Institute. And you'll get on our mailing lists and you will begin to receive our newsletters and more information about events like these. So certainly we welcome you all to join the coalition. In addition to webinars such as these, we are asking folks to save the date for our 3rd annual convening that will be held October 8, 9, and 10 of 2025. Planning will be underway shortly. And much planning has already begun to take place. In addition to that QR code, there is a QR code for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law. This QR code will give you an opportunity to invest in racial equity through charitable grants and services and provide more information about that. We are certainly grateful for to have opportunities where folks can plug in. And if we had to name this portion of the webinar, given the themes that you may have heard about woven throughout our webinar, this is the altar call. This is where we say, this is the point of the service where everyone can participate. So certainly take advantage of those altar calls. A huge thank you to both Mr. Damon Hewitt and Dean Conway. We appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon. And we are grateful for Jay Austin, of course, for being a moderator supreme in this conversation. And for all of our colleagues here at Dickinson Law who joined us, Serena, thank you. Ian, thank you for all that you do. Thank you all for all that you do each and every single day. And we'll catch you at the next time, the next program, next bat channel. We'll be back. Thank you all. Take care.